My name is Jean, and I just turned 58 last month. For 30 years, I raised my son Marcus as a single mother after my husband passed away when Marcus was just 8. We had this unbreakable bond, or so I thought. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone, it was just the two of us against the world. But 2 years ago, Marcus married Sarah, and suddenly, our little tradition of celebrating my birthday together started feeling like an obligation rather than joy. This year, something happened that changed everything forever. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button. This story will show you sometimes the biggest gifts come wrapped in the most painful moments. I live alone now in our 4-bedroom house in Austin, Texas. It's the same house I bought when Marcus was 12, stretching every dollar I had because I wanted him to have his own room, a backyard, and space to grow. The neighborhood was called Maple Heights, full of families with children, tree-lined streets, and the kind of community where neighbors actually knew each other's names. I chose this house specifically because I wanted Marcus to have stability, to feel rooted somewhere after losing his father so young. After David died, I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Days I was a receptionist at Dr. Morrison's dental office on Guadalupe Street. The work was steady but mind-numbing, answering phones, scheduling appointments, processing insurance claims. Evenings and weekends, I cleaned office buildings downtown with a small janitorial company. I'd take Marcus with me sometimes when he was younger, and he'd do homework in empty conference rooms while I vacuumed and emptied trash cans. Those years blur together now, but I remember the exhaustion, the constant worry about money, the way my feet ached after 12-hour days. I remember Marcus sitting at our kitchen table working through math problems while I made dinner from whatever was on sale that week. Spaghetti with meat sauce became our Friday night tradition because ground beef was cheap and 1 pound could stretch into multiple meals. We'd talk about his day at school, his friends, his dreams of becoming a computer programmer like his father. David had been a software engineer at a tech startup before he got sick. Cancer took him fast, 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. The life insurance helped with immediate expenses, but it wasn't enough to maintain our old lifestyle. We moved from our apartment near the university to this house in a less expensive neighborhood. I sold David's car and most of our furniture, keeping only the pieces that held memories we couldn't afford to lose. When Marcus graduated high school with honors and a partial scholarship to University of Texas, I felt like we'd accomplished something remarkable together. But the scholarship only covered tuition. Room and board, books, living expenses, all of that still fell to me. I sold my mother's small condo that I'd inherited, the only real asset I had left, to help pay for his college education. 4 years of business school cost nearly $60,000, even with his scholarship. But watching him walk across that stage made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. After graduation, Marcus landed a good job at TechFlow, a growing software company in downtown Austin. Starting salary was $45,000 a year, more money than I'd ever made in my life. He rented a nice apartment near the office, bought his first car with his own money, and for the first time since David died, I felt like we'd made it through the hard part. For years, our relationship stayed strong and connected. Marcus called me every morning during his commute to work, a 15-minute drive that became our daily catch-up time. We'd talk about everything: his projects at work, office politics, the books I was reading, weekend plans. Every Sunday, we had lunch together at Rosie's Diner on South 1st Street. It was nothing fancy, just good comfort food and bottomless coffee, but it was ours. When Marcus had a bad day, I was his first call. When he got promoted to senior developer, I was the first person he told. The waitresses at Rosie's knew us by name, knew our usual orders, knew to bring extra napkins, because Marcus always spilled something on his shirt. We'd sit in the same booth by the window, and I'd listen to him talk about coding problems I didn't understand, work relationships I couldn't navigate, career decisions I couldn't advise on. But he still wanted my perspective, still valued my opinion, still needed his mom in ways that made me feel essential to his happiness. Then he met Sarah at a professional development conference 3 years ago. She was a corporate lawyer from Dallas, 28 years old, beautiful in that polished way that comes from professional styling and expensive clothes. Her family owned Morrison & Associates Real Estate Development, a company that built shopping centers and office complexes across North Texas. They lived in Highland Park, one of those exclusive Dallas neighborhoods where the average home cost more than I'd made in my entire working life. When Marcus first brought Sarah to meet me, she was polite but clearly uncomfortable in my modest home. She had this way of looking around like she was taking inventory, noticing the outdated furniture, the worn carpet, the small rooms that seemed even smaller next to her elegant presence. During dinner, she steered conversations toward restaurants I'd never heard of, vacation destinations I'd never visited, cultural events I couldn't afford to attend. I tried to connect with her, asking about her work, her interests, her family. Her answers were perfectly cordial but revealed nothing personal. She talked about her law practice like she was reciting a resume, described her family's business ventures like she was giving a presentation to potential investors. When I mentioned my love of reading, she nodded politely, but changed the subject back to Marcus's career prospects. The first real sign of change came during their engagement period. Marcus started canceling our Sunday lunches because Sarah had planned couple activities with her friends. Wine tastings in the Hill Country, weekend trips to Houston for museum exhibits, dinner parties with other young professionals in Austin's tech scene. These weren't bad things, and I understood that couples needed time together, but they always seemed to conflict with our established traditions. The daily phone calls became weekly, then sporadic. When I did talk to Marcus, the conversations felt rushed, distracted. He'd mentioned places they'd been, people they'd met, opportunities Sarah's father had mentioned for advancing his career. I started to feel like I was hearing about his life secondhand, like I'd become a stranger receiving updates rather than a confidant sharing experiences. When they announced their engagement, I was genuinely happy for Marcus. I wanted him to find love, to build a family, to have the kind of partnership I'd had with his father. But planning the wedding revealed just how much I'd been relegated to the sidelines of his life. Sarah's mother had opinions about everything from the venue, to the flowers, to the guest list. When I suggested incorporating some family traditions like using David's wedding ring in the ceremony, or including his favorite song in the reception playlist, Sarah smiled politely and said they were trying to keep things simple and modern. I felt like a spectator at my own son's wedding, sitting in the third row behind Sarah's extended family while they filled the first several rows. The ceremony was beautiful, held at an expensive country club with perfect flowers and professional photography. But it felt like watching strangers get married. None of our traditions were included. None of our family history was acknowledged. None of the love story that had created Marcus seemed relevant to the new story he was writing with Sarah. After they married and moved into a beautiful apartment in downtown Austin, the changes became more pronounced. Marcus would visit, but always with a time limit because Sarah was waiting at home or they had plans with her friends. When I called, I could hear her in the background asking who was on the phone, her voice carrying a subtle note of impatience. Gradually, I realized I was becoming an obligation in Marcus's life, while Sarah's family represented his future, his opportunities, his real relationships. Her parents had a lake house in East Texas where they spent most weekends. They had season tickets to Dallas Cowboys games and box seats for Rangers baseball. They belonged to exclusive country clubs and attended charity galas where Marcus could network with influential people. What did I have to offer in comparison? Sunday lunches at a diner and memories of a life Marcus seemed increasingly eager to leave behind. 3 weeks before my 58th birthday, I made reservations at Bella Vista, the cozy Italian restaurant where Marcus and I had celebrated every special occasion since he was 10 years old. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, squeezed between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on Barton Springs Road. But Giuseppe, the owner, had been running it for 20 years, and he knew our family story, remembered when Marcus was small enough to need a booster seat and shy enough to hide behind my legs when ordering. The restaurant had maybe 15 tables, mismatched chairs, and walls covered with faded photographs of Giuseppe's family in Sicily. The lighting was dim and romantic, perfect for couples, but also warm and welcoming for families. Giuseppe's wife, Maria, did most of the cooking, traditional recipes passed down through generations. Nothing fancy, but everything made with love and attention to detail. Marcus and I had our usual corner table by the front window, where we could watch people walking by on the sidewalk. When he was younger, we'd play games while waiting for our food, guessing stories about the strangers we saw, making up elaborate histories for dog walkers and joggers. As he got older, we'd talk about school friends, his dreams of following in his father's footsteps in the tech industry. This restaurant held so many of our important conversations. When Marcus was 13 and struggling with grief over losing his father, we sat at that same table while he cried into his spaghetti and meatballs, asking why bad things happen to good people. When he was 16 and worried about college applications, we mapped out his future over plates of Giuseppe's famous lasagna. When he graduated and landed his first job, we toasted with glasses of Chianti, while Maria brought us complimentary tiramisu. I specifically requested our corner table when I made the reservation, explaining to Giuseppe that it was my birthday celebration with Marcus. He smiled warmly and promised to save a bottle of the good wine we'd shared on special occasions. I could already picture the evening, Marcus arriving slightly late because he always ran behind, apologizing while pulling out my chair, launching into stories about work while we shared the antipasto platter we always ordered. Planning what to wear took several shopping trips to stores I rarely visited anymore. My wardrobe had become practical over the years, comfortable clothes for work and casual outings. Nothing fancy enough for a celebration that felt important. I finally found a navy dress at Nordstrom Rack, marked down from its original price, but still more than I usually spent on clothes. It was elegant but not flashy, with 3/4 sleeves and a flattering fit that made me feel confident and attractive. The week before my birthday, I made an appointment at a salon I'd never been to, a place Marcus had mentioned Sarah frequented for special occasions. The stylist, a young woman named Jessica with colorful tattoos covering her arms, listened carefully as I described what I wanted. Something sophisticated, but not too dramatic, appropriate for a nice dinner with my son. She cut 2 inches off my graying brown hair and styled it in soft waves that took 10 years off my appearance. Getting my nails done felt like an indulgence I couldn't quite justify. But I did it anyway. Clear polish with a subtle shimmer. Nothing too bold for someone my age, but enough to make my hands look polished and cared for. These small vanities felt foreign after years of prioritizing practicality over appearance. But I wanted to look nice for Marcus. Wanted him to be proud to be seen with his mother. The gift I'd been planning required more courage than any salon appointment. Since David's death, I'd kept his personal belongings in a cedar chest in my bedroom closet. His wedding ring, his college graduation watch, photographs from our honeymoon letters he'd written me during our courtship. Most precious of all was his Omega Seamaster, the watch his own father had given him when he graduated from University of Texas with his engineering degree. David wore that watch every day of our marriage. It was on his wrist when Marcus took his first steps, when we bought our first house, when he taught Marcus to ride a bike in the driveway. During his illness, when the chemotherapy made him too weak for most activities, he still put on that watch every morning, a small act of normalcy in a time when nothing felt normal. After David died, I'd promised myself I'd give the watch to Marcus when he reached an important milestone in his life. Graduation felt too early, his first job too mundane, his engagement too focused on Sarah and her family. But my 58th birthday felt significant somehow, like the right moment to pass down this tangible connection to his father. I took the watch to a jeweler to have it cleaned and serviced, making sure it would keep perfect time for decades to come. The jeweler, an elderly man who remembered David from years past, handled it with the reverence it deserved. When I picked it up, it gleamed like new, but still carried the subtle scratches and wear marks that told the story of a life well lived. Wrapping the watch felt ceremonial. I chose silver paper and a navy ribbon that matched my dress, writing a card that explained the significance of the gift. I wanted Marcus to understand that this wasn't just a watch, but a legacy, a connection to the father he'd lost too young, a symbol of the love that had created him and shaped his character. The Tuesday before my birthday, I called Marcus to confirm our dinner plans. He was at work, and I could hear keyboard clicking and office chatter in the background. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" he said, his voice distracted but not unfriendly. "I just wanted to make sure we're still on for Friday night at Bella Vista," I said, trying to sound casual, even though this dinner had become the focal point of my entire week. "Friday night." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him mentally checking his calendar. "Oh, right, your birthday dinner. Yeah, of course. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Mom." Those words, "wouldn't miss it for the world," echoed in my mind for days afterward. They felt like a promise, a guarantee that no matter how much his life had changed, this tradition between us remained sacred. I held on to those words through the rest of the week, repeating them to myself whenever doubts crept into my thoughts. The morning of my birthday, I woke up early with the kind of anticipation I hadn't felt in months. I made myself a special breakfast French toast with fresh strawberries and real maple syrup, the same meal I used to make Marcus on his birthdays when he was little. I ate slowly, savoring each bite while reading the newspaper and enjoying the luxury of an unhurried morning. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Marcus's traditional birthday call. Every year since he was old enough to understand the concept of birthdays, he'd called me first thing in the morning to sing happy birthday. Even during college, even during his busiest periods at work, that call always came. It was our thing, a ritual that marked the official beginning of my special day. By 10 o'clock, my phone remained stubbornly silent. I told myself Marcus was probably just sleeping in, maybe planning some kind of surprise, perhaps even coordinating with Giuseppe to arrange something special at the restaurant. But a small knot of anxiety began forming in my stomach, a whisper of doubt that I tried hard to ignore. I spent the morning cleaning house with nervous energy, dusting furniture that was already clean, organizing closets that didn't need organizing. The wrapped watch sat on my kitchen counter like a promise of the evening ahead, silver paper catching the morning light streaming through the windows. Every few minutes, I'd glance at it and smile, imagining Marcus's face when he opened it, picturing his reaction when he read my card. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I finally broke down and called Marcus myself. When he answered after several rings, I could immediately hear that he wasn't alone. Background noise filled the phone voices, talking and laughing, the distinctive sound of people having a good time outdoors. Music played softly in the distance, something upbeat and party-like that definitely wasn't work-related. "Mom, I'm at Sarah's parents' lake house. Can I call you back?" His voice was hurried, distracted, like I'd interrupted something important. Before I could even wish myself a happy birthday out loud, before I could ask about our dinner plans, he'd hung up, leaving me staring at my silent phone. I stood in my kitchen, processing what I'd just heard. Sarah's parents' lake house was in Mineola, East Texas, almost 3 hours away from Austin, depending on traffic. If Marcus was there now, relaxing and partying, he'd have to leave immediately to make our 6:30 reservation. The casual tone of his voice, the unhurried way he'd dismissed my call, didn't suggest someone who was watching the clock and preparing to drive back to the city for his mother's birthday dinner. My first instinct was to stay positive, to find reasonable explanations for what I'd heard. Maybe they'd driven up very early that morning and were planning to head back soon. Maybe Sarah's family had organized a quick lunch before Marcus returned for our dinner. Maybe the party sounds I'd heard were just a brief gathering that would end well before he needed to leave. I tried to distract myself by getting ready anyway, telling myself that worrying wouldn't change anything, and that Marcus had never broken a promise to me before. I took a long shower using the expensive body wash I'd been saving for special occasions. I applied my makeup carefully, taking time with each step, creating the kind of polished look that would make me feel confident sitting across from my handsome son. The navy dress fit perfectly, hugging my figure in flattering ways while remaining age-appropriate and elegant. I added the pearl necklace David had given me for our 10th wedding anniversary, simple but sophisticated. Looking in the mirror, I felt prettier than I had in months, ready for an evening that would remind us both how much our relationship meant. At 4 o'clock, I called Marcus again, needing to hear his voice, needing some reassurance about our plans. This time, my call went straight to voicemail, which meant either his phone was dead or he'd deliberately sent me to voicemail. The cheerful automated message. "Hi, you've reached Marcus. Leave me a message and I'll get back to you," felt mocking under the circumstances. I left a carefully casual voicemail trying to keep the worry out of my voice. "Hi, honey. Just checking on our dinner plans for tonight. I'll head to Bella Vista around 6:15 to make sure our table is ready, so meet me there whenever you can make it. Looking forward to seeing you. Love you." Hanging up, I realized my hands were trembling slightly. The knot of anxiety in my stomach had grown larger, harder to ignore. But I pushed down the doubts, reminding myself that Marcus was 30 years old, capable of managing his own schedule, responsible enough to honor commitments to his mother. Surely he wouldn't forget something as important as my birthday dinner. I spent the afternoon in my living room reading a book, but not really absorbing the words. The wrapped watch sat on my coffee table, now moved there from the kitchen, so I could see it while I waited. Every few minutes, I'd glance at it and try to recapture the excitement I'd felt that morning, the anticipation of sharing this meaningful gift with my son. The grandfather clock in my hallway, a wedding present from David's parents, chimed every quarter hour, marking time that seemed to move both too slowly and too quickly. I found myself calculating and recalculating driving times from East Texas to Austin, factoring in weekend traffic, trying to determine the latest Marcus could leave the lake house and still make our reservation. At 5 o'clock, I started getting genuinely worried. Even if Marcus left immediately, he'd be cutting it close to arrive by 6:30. But my phone remained silent, no call explaining delays, no text providing updates. The silence felt ominous, loaded with implications I didn't want to consider. I tried calling one more time at 5:30, but again got voicemail. This time, I didn't leave a message. What was there to say? That I was worried? That I needed confirmation he was coming? That my birthday was turning into a nightmare of doubt and disappointment? None of those things felt appropriate to dump into a voicemail message. By 6 o'clock, I had to face the possibility that Marcus might not show up at all. But I couldn't bring myself to cancel the reservation, couldn't accept that our tradition might be ending this way. I grabbed my purse, picked up the wrapped watch, and drove to Bella Vista anyway, clinging to the hope that I'd find Marcus waiting for me in the parking lot with a sheepish grin and a good explanation. The hostess at Bella Vista greeted me with her usual warm smile, but I could see confusion flicker across her face when she looked behind me for Marcus. "Good evening, Mrs. Patterson. Table for 2 tonight," she asked, consulting her reservation book, even though she clearly remembered our standing tradition. "Just me for now?" I said, trying to sound casual despite the embarrassment burning in my cheeks. "Marcus is running a little late, but he'll be here soon." Giuseppe appeared from behind the hostess stand, wiping his hands on his apron, his weathered face creasing into a concerned frown. He'd been expecting both of us had probably prepared something special for my birthday celebration. "Signora Jean, you are early tonight. Where is your boy?" "Traffic," I lied smoothly, surprised at how easily the fabrication came. "You know how Friday evening can be." David, our usual waiter, led me to the corner table by the window that he'd held for us as promised. The table was set for 2, with the restaurant's best dinnerware, a small candle flickering in the center, and a bottle of Chianti already breathing nearby. Giuseppe had clearly planned to make this birthday dinner special, which made my solitary presence even more painful. "Should I wait to bring bread, or would you like to start with something while you wait?" David asked kindly. His question carried layers of meaning, a gentle inquiry about how long I expected to sit alone, whether I needed anything to occupy myself while waiting for someone who might not come. "Let's wait just a few more minutes," I said, settling into my chair and placing my purse and the wrapped gift on Marcus's empty seat. The restaurant was filling up with the typical Friday night crowd. Young couples sharing appetizers and gazing into each other's eyes. Families with children arguing over what to order. Groups of friends celebrating the end of the work week with wine and laughter. I watched a grandfather at a nearby table, helping his granddaughter read the menu, pointing to pictures and explaining unfamiliar words. At another table, a woman about my age was celebrating something with what looked like her adult daughter and son-in-law, all three of them, animated and happy, clearly enjoying each other's company. The contrast with my solitary vigil felt stark and humiliating. At 6:45, I ordered a glass of the Chianti, mainly because sitting at the table without consuming anything felt awkward under David's watchful eye. The wine was good, rich, and warm, but it couldn't quiet the growing certainty that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't like Marcus at all. Even if he was running late, even if he was stuck in traffic, he would have called. He would have sent a text. He would have done something to let me know he was thinking of me on my birthday. The alcohol helped ease some of my anxiety, but it also made me more aware of my surroundings, more conscious of being the only person in the restaurant eating alone on a Friday night. I kept checking my phone, refreshing my messages, hoping to see Marcus's name appear on my screen with an explanation and an estimated arrival time. At 7:15, my phone finally buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Relief flooded through me so quickly, I almost gasped out loud. "Mom, sorry running late, stuck in traffic from the lake. Order without me, I'll be there soon." I read the message 3 times, parsing every word for clues about his actual location and intentions. Stuck in traffic from the lake confirmed he was still in East Texas, still 3 hours away from Austin. But "I'll be there soon" suggested he was actively traveling, that he'd left the lake house and was on his way to meet me. I signaled David and ordered the antipasto platter we always shared, along with a second glass of wine to calm my nerves. Marcus would arrive stressed and apologetic, full of explanations about unexpected delays and last-minute complications. I'd forgive him immediately, of course. We'd laugh about my worry later, how anxious I'd been over something completely out of his control. The antipasto arrived beautifully arranged on a large oval platter. Sliced salami and prosciutto, chunks of aged Parmesan olives in 3 different varieties, roasted red peppers glistening with olive oil. I nibbled at the edges, saving most of it for Marcus, checking the door every few minutes for his familiar silhouette. 7:30 became 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock stretched toward 8:15. My earlier relief was curdling into something darker and more desperate. How long could someone realistically be stuck in traffic? Even if there had been an accident, even if every highway between East Texas and Austin was completely gridlocked, wouldn't Marcus have called to explain? Wouldn't he have provided more specific updates? I tried calling his number, needing to hear his voice, needing confirmation that he was actually in a car driving toward me and not still lounging by a lake 3 hours away. When he answered after several rings, the sounds that came through the phone shattered my remaining hope, like glass hitting concrete. Music played in the background, loud and festive. Definitely not car radio, but party music with bass lines that thumped through outdoor speakers. There were voices everywhere, people laughing and talking, the unmistakable sounds of a celebration in full swing. And then, clear as day, I heard Sarah's voice, not in the background, but close to the phone, as if she was standing right next to Marcus. "Gene, Marcus is in the hot tub right now. Can he call you tomorrow?" The line went dead, and I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen, as reality crashed over me like ice water. There was no traffic jam. There was no frantic drive back to Austin. There was no intention of making it to our dinner at all. Marcus was at a party in a hot tub, celebrating something that had nothing to do with my birthday, while I sat alone in our special restaurant waiting for someone who was never coming. Sarah had answered his phone like it was perfectly normal for him to be unreachable on his mother's birthday. Her tone had been polite but dismissive, like I was an interrupting telemarketer, rather than the woman who'd raised Marcus, who'd sacrificed everything to give him the life that had led him to lakeside parties with wealthy in-laws. I paid for my untouched antipasto and walked out of Bella Vista in a daze, leaving behind the flickering candle and the empty chair that would have held my son if I'd mattered enough for him to remember his promise. Giuseppe tried to ask what was wrong, but I couldn't form words to explain that my relationship with my only child had apparently ended without my knowledge. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. 20 minutes that felt like hours navigating familiar streets, that suddenly seemed foreign and hostile. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes, unable to make my legs work, staring at my house with its single porch light glowing like a beacon for no one. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, when I'd been full of excitement and anticipation for the evening ahead. My coffee cup still sat in the sink. The newspaper lay folded on the kitchen table. The birthday card I'd written to accompany Marcus's gift remained propped against the wrapped watch, waiting to be opened and read and treasured. I changed out of my navy dress, hanging it carefully in the closet, even though it now carried the memory of humiliation and disappointment. I put on my oldest, most comfortable pajamas, soft cotton, that had been washed so many times the fabric felt like silk against my skin. Then I sat at my kitchen table and waited for whatever came next. At 8:30, my phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before opening the message, part of me hoping for an apology and explanation, part of me dreading confirmation of what I already knew. "Mom, so sorry. Sarah's family planned a surprise celebration for me today. I totally forgot about dinner. Can we reschedule for next week?" I read those words over and over, each reading, making them more incomprehensible. A surprise celebration for him. On my birthday, a party so compelling that he'd totally forgot about our dinner, forgot that this was supposed to be my special day, forgot 30 years of birthday traditions between us. The casual tone of his text made everything worse. No acknowledgement of the significance of what he'd done, no recognition that he'd left his mother sitting alone in a restaurant on her birthday. Just a simple request to reschedule, as if our dinner was a routine business meeting that could be moved to accommodate more important commitments. I found myself wondering what kind of celebration Sarah's family had organized that was worth abandoning his mother for. Was it related to Marcus's work, some career opportunity that required his immediate attention? Was it a family tradition I didn't know about? Something that took precedence over obligations to anyone outside their circle? Or was it simply that being included in their wealthy, sophisticated world felt more important than maintaining connections to his modest past? The small birthday cake I'd bought for dessert sat unopened on my kitchen counter, a pathetic single-layer chocolate cake from the grocery store bakery. I'd imagined sharing it with Marcus after dinner, maybe with coffee and Irish cream, while I told him stories about his father that I'd been saving for when he was mature enough to appreciate them. Instead, I found myself cutting a thin slice and eating it standing alone in my empty kitchen. I unwrapped the Omega watch and held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the smooth metal still warm from being wrapped for so many hours. This watch had been on David's wrist during every important moment of Marcus's childhood. First steps, first words, first day of school, Little League games, piano recitals, science fair projects. It had ticked away the seconds during bedtime stories and homework help and father-son fishing trips to Lake Travis. David had loved this watch not for its monetary value, but for what it represented. His father had worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant to afford it as a graduation gift, a symbol of pride in his son's achievements and faith in his future. David had planned to pass it on to Marcus when the time was right, during a moment that honored both the gift and the legacy it carried. Now it felt like just another relic of relationships that no longer existed, connections that had been severed by indifference and new priorities. Marcus would probably accept it politely if I gave it to him, might even wear it occasionally, but he wouldn't understand its significance. He wouldn't feel the weight of history on his wrist, or think about his father's love every time he checked the time. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I thought tears would come, thought I should be sobbing into the birthday cake or screaming into the empty house. Instead, I felt something else entirely, a hollow numbness that was somehow worse than acute pain. Grief. I understood sadness, I could process anger, I could express. But this emptiness, this absence of feeling anything at all, left me adrift in my own life. I'd lost my son not to death or distance, but to something more subtle and perhaps more final. I'd been replaced by people who could offer him things I couldn't. Experiences I couldn't provide, opportunities I couldn't create. I'd become background noise in his life, someone whose feelings could be forgotten in favor of hot tub parties with wealthy in-laws. The house felt impossibly large around me. 4 bedrooms for one person, a dining room table that seated 8, but only ever served one anymore. I wandered from room to room, touching furniture that held memories of happier times, photographs that documented a relationship that apparently existed more in my mind than in reality. In Marcus's old bedroom, I sat on the bed I'd made up fresh every week for 2 years after he moved out, hoping he'd stay overnight during visits. The room looked like a shrine to a childhood that meant more to me than it did to him. Trophies and certificates covering the walls, stuffed animals still arranged on shelves like he might want to play with them again. I realized I'd been living in the past while Marcus had moved forward without me building a life that had no room for childhood bedrooms or mothers who cleaned office buildings to pay for college tuition. His future was bright and successful and completely separate from the woman who'd made it possible. Sitting in that quiet house, surrounded by evidence of love that was no longer valued, I began to understand that I had choices to make. I could continue existing as Marcus's forgotten obligation, waiting for scraps of attention between more important commitments. Or I could figure out what my life might look like if I stopped organizing it around someone who'd clearly stopped organizing his around me. I woke up Saturday morning with a strange sensation in my chest. Not the crushing weight of sadness I'd expected, but something harder and more crystalline. Clarity, perhaps. Or determination. I made coffee with unusual deliberation, measuring grounds and water like precision mattered, then sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began examining documents I hadn't looked at closely in years. The house deed, which I pulled up through my online banking portal, showed both my name and Marcus's name as owners. I'd added him as co-owner 5 years earlier when he was 25, and starting his career thinking it would simplify inheritance issues when the time came. The mortgage was nearly paid off, just 18 months of payments remaining, but legally, Marcus owned half of everything I'd worked 30 years to achieve. My savings account, accumulated through decades of careful budgeting and strategic investing, listed Marcus as the primary beneficiary. The balance had grown to $153,000 money I'd saved by buying generic groceries and driving used cars and postponing every personal luxury I might have wanted. Marcus could access those funds immediately if something happened to me or with my signature if he needed them for a major purchase. My investment portfolio built slowly through small monthly contributions to mutual funds and retirement accounts also designated Marcus as the sole beneficiary. My life insurance policy, my jewelry, my personal belongings, everything was meticulously arranged to transfer to him seamlessly upon my death. I'd spent years organizing my entire financial existence around his future security and convenience, and I'd never once stopped to consider what I might want for myself during the years I had left. I called my financial advisor, Margaret, who'd also been my friend since we'd worked together at the dental office 20 years earlier. She'd left healthcare to get her investment license and had been managing my modest portfolio with the skill and attention usually reserved for much wealthier clients. "Maggie, I need to make some changes," I said when she answered her home phone. "Can you meet me Monday morning?" "Of course, honey. What kind of changes are we talking about?" "All of them." There was a pause before she responded, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "Jean, are you all right? You sound different." Monday morning, I sat in Margaret's office conference room with a stack of papers spread across the mahogany table, signing documents that removed Marcus's name from every account, every policy, every legal arrangement I'd created. The house would be refinanced under my name only, which would actually save me money since my credit score had improved dramatically over the years. The savings account would be moved to a new institution with only my name and social security number attached. Jean, are you absolutely sure about this? Margaret asked, watching me initial page after page with steady hands. These are pretty significant changes. Have you discussed this with Marcus? I'm more sure of this than I've been about anything in 30 years, I replied, signing my name with flourishes I hadn't used since high school. And no, I haven't discussed it with Marcus. These are my accounts, my decisions, my life. Margaret nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. She'd been divorced twice herself and recognized the look of someone finally choosing themselves over obligations to ungrateful family members. What do you want to do with the beneficiary designations? Leave them blank for now. I want to establish a trust, I said, surprising myself with the decisiveness in my voice. Split everything equally between the literacy foundation that helped Marcus with reading difficulties when he was young, the scholarship fund at his father's university, and the local food bank where I used to volunteer. The lawyer I consulted Tuesday afternoon was a woman about my age named Patricia Hennings, recommended by Margaret for her expertise in estate planning and family financial transitions. Her office was warm and welcoming, filled with family photographs and comfortable furniture that made difficult conversations easier to navigate. Patricia listened carefully as I explained my situation, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that helped me understand the full implications of what I was doing. When I signed the papers removing Marcus as my beneficiary and establishing the charitable trust, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying invisible weight that was finally lifted. These changes will take effect immediately, Patricia explained, handing me copies of everything I'd signed. Your son will have no legal claim to any of these assets, and he won't be notified of the changes unless you choose to tell him. What if he contests the trust after I die? I asked suddenly, worried that my careful planning might be undone by legal challenges I couldn't anticipate. The documentation is ironclad, Patricia assured me. You're mentally competent, you're not under duress, and you're making these decisions with full knowledge of their consequences. No court would overturn your clearly stated wishes. Walking out of that law office, I felt like I was stepping into a completely new version of my life. For the first time in 30 years, my financial decisions were based on what I wanted, what I valued, what would make me happy. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with Marcus's name on the screen. I looked at it for several rings before answering, no longer desperate to hear from him, no longer arranging my day around the hope that he might call. Hi, Marcus, I said calmly. Mom, about Friday night, I'm really sorry. Sarah's family had this whole surprise party planned for some business deal her father just closed, and they insisted I stay. You understand, right? I understand perfectly, I said, and I did. I understood that his wife's family would always take precedence over his mother. I understood that their money and connections and social status would always outweigh whatever I could offer. I understood that the little boy who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day had grown into a man who could forget his mother's birthday for a business celebration that had nothing to do with him. So, we're good. Can we do dinner next weekend instead? We're fine, Marcus. And yes, we can have dinner next weekend. I didn't tell him about the financial changes I'd made, didn't explain what I'd realized or what I'd decided. That conversation would come later, when he discovered the truth on his own terms. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking around at the house that was now truly and completely mine. For 30 years, I'd thought of it as our house, the place where I'd raised my son and stored our memories. Now it was simply my house, the place where I lived and could create whatever future I wanted for myself. I made a list of things I'd always wanted to do but had postponed for financial reasons, or because they seemed selfish when Marcus might need something. Travel to Europe, take art classes, learn to speak Spanish, volunteer for causes I cared about, maybe even consider dating again. For the first time since David died, I began to imagine a life that wasn't defined entirely by my role as Marcus's mother. 3 months passed before Marcus discovered what I'd done, and they were the best 3 months I'd had in years. I joined a book club at the local library where I discovered I had strong opinions about contemporary fiction and a gift for leading discussions. I started taking yoga classes at a studio near my house, slowly regaining flexibility and strength I'd lost during years of putting everyone else's needs first. Most surprisingly, began traveling. Small trips at first, a weekend in San Antonio, visiting the missions, a long weekend in New Orleans exploring jazz clubs and art galleries. Then bolder adventures, a week in Colorado hiking in the mountains, 10 days in Italy following Rick Steves' recommendations, and eating the kind of food I'd only read about in books. Each trip felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. I'd been Jean the mother for so long that I'd almost lost track of Jean, the individual, the woman with her own interests and desires and curiosity about the world. Traveling alone felt scary at first, but also liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. No one else's schedule to accommodate, no compromises about what to see or where to eat. Just my own preferences guiding every decision. I started taking watercolor painting classes at the community college, something I'd wanted to try since high school, but had never found time for. My instructor, a retired art teacher named Frank, praised my sense of color and encouraged me to experiment with different techniques. I wasn't particularly talented, but I was enthusiastic, and that seemed to matter more than natural ability. For the first time in decades, my calendar was full of activities I'd chosen for myself, rather than obligations to other people. Book club met every other Tuesday evening. Yoga happened 3 mornings a week. Painting class was Thursday afternoons. I volunteered at the Literacy Foundation on Saturday mornings, helping adults learn to read the same way they'd helped Marcus overcome his early struggles with dyslexia. Marcus called occasionally during these months, brief conversations about work, and Sarah and their ongoing house hunting efforts. I listened politely and asked appropriate questions, but I no longer hung on every word or treasured every interaction. Our relationship had shifted to something more casual and less fraught, which felt healthier for both of us. He and Sarah were trying to buy a house in one of Austin's more exclusive neighborhoods, something befitting their combined professional status and her family's expectations. They'd been pre-approved for a substantial mortgage, but like many young couples, they needed help with the down payment to avoid private mortgage insurance and secure better interest rates. In March, Marcus called with excitement in his voice that I hadn't heard in months. "Mom, we found the perfect house. It's in Westlake, 4 bedrooms, gorgeous kitchen, everything Sarah has wanted. The only thing is, we need about $50,000 for the down payment to get the best loan terms." I was in my garden when he called, planting tomatoes and herbs in the raised beds I'd had installed the month before. Gardening had become another unexpected passion, something peaceful and productive, that connected me to the seasons and the natural world in ways I'd never experienced growing up in apartments and condos. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, brushing dirt from my hands and sitting on the garden bench I'd bought with money from my Italy trip fund. "Have you saved enough for the down payment?" "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I checked my savings account yesterday, and it seems like something went wrong with the bank. They're saying I don't have access anymore, that only you can make withdrawals. Did you change something?" The moment I'd been expecting had finally arrived, and I felt surprisingly calm about it. "I moved the money to an account under my name only," I said simply. It seemed like the responsible thing to do. "But Mom, we were counting on that money for the house. You said I could use it when I got married and was ready to buy a place." "I said a lot of things when you were younger, Marcus. I also said I'd always be there for you, and you'd always be there for me. Things change." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice smaller and more uncertain than I'd heard since he was a child. "This is about my birthday, isn't it?" "No, sweetheart, this is about my birthday." We agreed to meet for lunch the following Saturday at a new restaurant I'd discovered during my culinary adventures around Austin. It was the kind of place I never would have tried before, innovative American cuisine with ingredients I couldn't pronounce, and presentation that looked like art. Marcus arrived looking uncomfortable and confused, like the little boy who used to come to me when the world didn't make sense. "I don't understand what's happening," he said after we'd ordered, his hands fidgeting with his napkin the way they had when he was nervous about school presentations. First the money, then I find out you took my name off the house deed, and Margaret says you changed all your beneficiaries. It's like you're disowning me. I'm not disowning you, Marcus, I said gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I'm owning myself. I explained it as carefully as I could, how I'd spent 30 years organizing my entire existence around his needs and his future, how I'd forgotten to consider my own desires in the process. How his birthday behavior had shown me that he no longer saw me as a priority in his life, so I decided to make myself a priority in mine. You're 58 years old, Mom, he said, as if my age somehow disqualified me from having my own ambitions and dreams. What do you need money for? I need it for the same things you need it for. Security opportunities, experiences, peace of mind. I want to travel while I'm still healthy enough to enjoy it. I want to take classes and try new things and maybe even fall in love again someday. I want to live like I matter, not just wait around to die so you can inherit what's left. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion I hadn't heard since David's funeral. I'm sorry about your birthday, Mom. I really am. Sarah's family, they just assume I'll drop everything for their events, and I didn't want to cause problems in my marriage. I know, honey, and I don't blame you for choosing them. They can offer you things I can't, but I realize that if I'm going to be secondary in your life anyway, I might as well be primary in my own. We talked for 2 hours, the longest honest conversation we'd had since his wedding. Marcus cried a little, something I hadn't seen him do since he was 12 and his pet hamster died. He apologized repeatedly, promised to be more thoughtful, to remember what was important, to be a better son. I forgave him because forgiveness felt better than resentment, but I also made it clear that forgiveness didn't mean returning to our old patterns. I love you, Marcus, and I always will. But I spent 30 years making sure you had everything you needed to build your own life. Now I'm going to spend whatever time I have left building mine. What do you need, Mom? How can I help? I smiled at him, this grown man who was still in some fundamental way my little boy. I need you to understand that I'm not just your mother anymore. I'm also a woman with my own interests and goals and dreams. I need our relationship to be about mutual respect and genuine affection, not obligation and guilt. The changes in our relationship didn't happen overnight, but they did happen gradually and genuinely. Marcus started calling more regularly, not from duty, but from curiosity about my book club selections and travel plans. When Sarah made disparaging comments about my midlife crisis, Marcus defended my choices instead of making excuses for her attitude. When they eventually bought their house using conventional financing and their own savings, I felt proud of their independence rather than guilty about my refusal to subsidize their lifestyle. When they invited me for dinner, it felt like an invitation rather than an obligation grudgingly extended. I kept the Omega watch, deciding it belonged with me rather than being passed on to someone who might forget its significance. Sometimes I wear it to my art classes or book club meetings, and when people compliment it, I tell them about David and our love story about Marcus and our complicated journey about learning that the most important inheritance I could leave my son was the example of a woman who valued herself enough to live fully. The woman who sat alone in that restaurant eating birthday cake has become someone I'm genuinely proud to know. She travels confidently, has passionate opinions about literature and politics, grows beautiful vegetables, and makes friends easily. She's not waiting for anyone else to remember her birthday because she's learned to celebrate herself in small ways every single day. She's also learned that love doesn't require martyrdom, that being a good mother doesn't mean disappearing as an individual, that the most loving thing she could do for her son was teach him that his mother was worth respecting. Marcus is slowly learning those lessons too, discovering that he prefers the confident, interesting woman I've become to the anxious, self-sacrificing mother I used to be. That birthday wasn't the end of anything meaningful. It was the beginning of me finally choosing myself after 30 years of choosing everyone else first. I learned that sometimes the most painful moments in our lives become doorways to the most beautiful transformations. My son's betrayal taught me something precious about loyalty to myself, about the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in that love. The house that once felt too big now feels exactly right, filled with art supplies and travel souvenirs and books that reflect my expanding interests. The future that once looked empty now stretches ahead, full of possibilities I'm excited to explore. And the woman in the mirror, while older and grayer than she was a year ago, looks more alive and more authentic than she has in decades. Tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to choose between making others happy and making yourself whole? Have you found the courage to put yourself first when everyone expected you to put yourself last? Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to write your own happy ending, whatever that looks like for you. Until next time, remember that you matter, your happiness matters, and you deserve to be the main character in your own life story.